The Anarchist Cookbook. If you had a book like a rebellious teenager's diary crossed with a recipe collection for chaos, then that would be the Anarchist Cookbook. It's a legendary and controversial guidebook that teaches you how to stir up trouble in a kitchen called society. William Powell, the author, blended Han Solo's rebellious nature with Gordon Ramsay's kitchen prowess. Instead of whipping up cupcakes, this book gives you recipes on how to make explosive devices, offering step-by-step guides on making bombs, weapons, and other naughty contraptions. It's like that over-enthusiastic science teacher who accidentally burns down the lab during a fun experiment. Powell wrote this during the troublesome 1970s, which was a time when more people were thinking about rebellion and revolutions as a result of the Cold War. The problem with the Anarchist Cookbook is that it's not just a theoretical text for rebellious teenagers, it has real-world implications, having been linked to various acts of violence and mischief. As such, authorities weren't thrilled about this guide to chaos and other dangerous things. While critics see it as a danger to society, defenders see it as a misunderstood champion of free expression. But you can't call it a literary masterpiece when you see your kid turning a pipe into a bazooka. The Satanic Verses. If you see this book in an Everything Must Go backyard sale and buy it, thinking it would help you summon the devil for some infernal deal, you'll be disappointed. It's not a guide for calling up demons, but it's just as controversial within religious circles. The Satanic Verses starts with two dudes surviving an airplane explosion and suddenly start sprouting wings and experiencing hallucinations. They became fantasy creatures, with one turning into an angel, while the other one a devil, as if they were transported into a fantasy RPG game. Gabriel, the angel character, relived the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and this is where the controversy starts. The book's reimagining of the Prophet shows how Satan sprinkled a few verses in the Quran here and there, basically turning some of the parts of Islam's holiest book into the work of the devil. It was seen as blasphemous because it fictionalized Muhammad and introduced new controversial interpretations of Islamic history, turning it into the Voldemort of books. You can't even say its name without raising eyebrows. Because of the controversy surrounding it, libraries have hidden it away as if it were a map that leads to a hidden treasure. In 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran dropped a fatwa, an official Islam ruling, but essentially a death warrant, making the author of this book an outlaw, sending him into hiding from assassins. But it wasn't only because the content was problematic. The ripple effect was the scary part, because it sparked protests, debates, and violent reactions from the Islamic community. Religious leaders thought that he was mocking their sacred figures. Imagine someone at your house party throwing around your grandma's ashes. That's how these religious leaders felt about the Satanic Verses. Despite its controversy, the book is still widely talked about in non-religious circles, proving that you can still be the life of the party even if you're a party pooper. 120 Days of Sodom. 120 Days of Sodom by Marquis de Sade is so scandalous that it makes 50 Shades of Grey look like a Disney bedtime story. The book isn't just at the top of the list of R-rated stuff, but it's off the charts, somewhere close to XXX in terms of its obscenity. The book tells the story of a group of rich guys holed up in a castle, not for a polite tea party, but to indulge in every depraved fantasy known to humanity, rounding up 9 boys and girls and subjecting them to 120 days of unspeakable acts. You're looking at things so obscene that even Johnny Sins wouldn't dare to read this book. Marquis de Sade, the author, didn't hold back. Every horrible sexual act, from sadism to masochism, were served in this book, like a buffet of taboos with a side of outrage. You can think of it as a circus, where morality takes a step back and goes on vacation to give way to insanity, which became the new normal in this story. The book crossed the line and pole vaulted over it, becoming a forbidden novel that could give a nun a heart attack and send her straight to the emergency room. Lady Chatterley's Lover. It's the early 1900s in Old England, and every woman is buttoned up from her ankles to her neck. Seeing a bit of skin is the equivalent of seeing a Playboy magazine back then, but here comes D.H. Lawrence with Lady Chatterley's Lover. This forbidden book comes with its fair share of steamy storylines, with a dash of immorality. The story follows Lady Chatterley, stuck in a marriage that would make watching paint dry sound very exciting, because she's married to a paralyzed man unable to satisfy her womanly needs and desires. This lady isn't the type to sit around and knit all day. She craves adventure, passion, and a lot of that good old physical attention. But with her husband unable to do anything, she dives headfirst into an affair with the gamekeeper, Melors. Now this guy is your rugged fellow who tends to the woods and looks like he's on the front cover of a Men's Health magazine. Nothing says frailties of a woman better than a dude with rock-hard abs. But while you'd think that this steamy love affair in the woods upset people about this book, you're only looking at half of this story. Lawrence wrote the book to poke fun at England's rigid class structure and societal norms at a time when there were hardly any differences between a high-class Englishwoman and a nun. It insulted the foundations of England's high society, openly talking about sex and scandalous relationships while showing the differences between people from different classes. The 48 Laws of Power. When you combine books written by your manipulative ex and a master of social strategy, you get The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, which may look like a self-help book for climbing the corporate ladder of success, but is dark enough that it's been banned in a lot of different prison systems worldwide. The scoop is that the book introduces different ways for you to use strategies and tactics for success. But these tips aren't your simple wake up early, go to the gym, journal your goals advice you get from the usual TED Talks. Instead, they tell you how to manipulate people, places, and situations to get what you want. For example, one of the laws tells you to conceal your intentions. That's the perfect guide for being the sneakiest person at work. Another law tells you to let someone else do the work for you. It basically tells you to manipulate someone to make life easier. These tactics work wonders in a ruthless game of corporate thrones, where you kill or get killed in the corporate ladder system. But in regular life, it's like you're bringing a bazooka to a snowball fight, because it's ultimately overkill for you to be manipulating people in regular day-to-day interactions. Schools and prisons have banned the 48 Laws of Power out of fear of turning the lunchroom into a scene from Game of Thrones. Minus the backstabbing and the dragons, prisons already have a lot of problems to deal with. From drug lords to murderers, the last thing they need is to turn their inmates into masters of manipulative strategies. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Vladimir Nabokov is that one friend who can't keep his fantasies to himself, often telling you about the wet dreams he had last night and how he's dying to experience some sick pleasures. Naturally, you'd want to keep your ears covered the entire time, but he tells such a good story that you can't help but listen to him. That's what you get from Nabokov's book, Lolita. The book drops readers into the mind of a character named Humbert Humber, a seriously twisted guy obsessed with a 12-year-old girl named Dolores Hayes, aka Lolita. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, because you know that Humbert's moral compass is bound to crash and burn. Imagine telling your family that you're reading a book about a guy who sees a child as a seductive nymph he can't resist. It may be a literary masterpiece in terms of its writing and narrative, but you can't accept the twisted ideas surrounding a story about a grown man in love with a girl barely in her teens. But Nabokov's writing isn't just awkwardly flirting with pedophilia, it's also about how he is like a tragic clown who keeps tripping over his own bad decisions, and you find yourself oddly rooting for this bumbling mess. Throughout that time, you get a sneak preview into the darkest corners of his mind as he's trying to justify his obsession. The writer's genius lies in how he makes you squirm with discomfort while you marvel at his literary gifts. It makes you admire something you shouldn't be admiring, and that can be dangerous to a society that wants its kids to be kids instead of sex symbols. It's like you're introducing porn to a monk, potentially affecting his moral compass forever. Brave New World. Let's say you live in a world where everyone is happy, a little too happy. That's what you get in a book where everyone is forced to stay in line with little to no hope of getting out of that bubble. Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World, describes a society where people in this new world were forced to get hooked on a literal happy pill called Soma, which made them happy, suppressing deep emotions. It's also a world where society has an entire assembly line churning babies out like designer shoes. You get assigned to a caste, like it's a Hogwarts sorting hat ceremony. The government even controls your love life. It's like they control your Tinder account, swiping left until they see a person who would match you, forcing you to marry them. Put yourself in a world where society runs on consumerism, instant gratification, and tech control. Sound familiar? It's like our lives, but with extra drama. We've got smartphones and social media keeping us perpetually distracted, just like the novel's characters. Algorithms tell us what to think and feel, kind of like the government's puppet show in the book. It's like living in a dystopian sitcom where the punchline is our own life. Governments worldwide looked at this book and said, this Huxley guy might be onto something. Let's not give anyone any ideas. It's like they're worried we might trade freedom for the convenience that people get in Brave Brave New World. Naturally, it found its place in the forbidden library of taboo books. But from how things are going, Brave New World seems more of a cautionary tale that's already predicted the future for us. Who knows what Elon's Neuralink will do to our brains one day? Animal Farm. George Orwell's Animal Farm puts you in an Old MacDonald had a farm nursery rhyme that gets darker. The animals on this farm had enough of humans bossing them around, eventually kicking them out, and started running things themselves. No humans, no problems, right? That sounds like a great place for Porky and his pals to live in, but Orwell's book swiped at society through his fluffy tale of barnyard politics. The story revolves around how the pigs at the farm eventually took power, becoming the new head hogs. So from telling the chickens and everyone else that all animals are equal, these oinkers thought that they were better than everyone else, taking the place of the humans as the new oppressors. They turned the farm into a pig pen of oppression and inequality. In other words, Orwell was telling a story about how revolutions that try to give power back to the people will only lead to new dictators rising. The book is a satire that pokes fun at power-hungry leaders who promise equality but decide that they deserve more than everyone else. Governments who saw what Orwell was trying to do felt that Animal Farm was not just airing their dirty laundry, but also throwing it out for everyone, fearing it might inspire people to start looking at their leaders as less noble steeds and more like pigs. If you think that you have barnyard animals or pets seemingly plotting your downfall, you might want to share your thoughts with us by joining our Discord. The Grapes of Wrath. You'd think a book about grapes is as wholesome as biting into a batch of sweet fruit. However, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck makes you think that you're eating sour grapes that could turn your face upside down instantly. First, the book gives the Joad family's woes the spotlight in the most unflattering way possible. Set during the Great Depression, it's like Steinbeck decided to cast farmers as the villains of the agricultural world, complete with sinister mustaches and brooding glares. Instead of being your friendly neighborhood food producers, he turned them from farm heroes into sourpusses, making it seem like they harvested frowns instead of potatoes. The language and themes in the book were also as juicy as overripe grapes. There were plenty of scenes of violence, harsh realities, and profanity that were too sensitive for the mind of the regular 1940s American. Conservative readers would have wanted to go to church to confess that they read The Grapes of Wrath. As such, authorities feared that the book might corrupt the minds of the innocent and the youth, turning their brains into a chaotic fruit salad of rebellious thoughts. Then there was the belief that the book seemed un-American. It criticized capitalism, looking like it was a bit too red for comfort during a time when Americans feared the spread of communism. Slaughterhouse-Five. The first thing you'd usually hear from people who've heard about Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five is that it's that book about time traveling and aliens. But there's a deeper reason why this novel found itself in the dimension of banned books. It's basically about a soldier who got so lost in time that he traveled from one era to another, playing hopscotch through history, but with explosions. At one point, he's a POW in Dresden, Germany during its infamous bombing, and the book paints it under the worst lighting possible. Written during the Cold War, when the government tried to convince everyone that fighting communists was as American as apple pie, this book was like the literary equivalent of someone wearing a "Make Love, Not War" t-shirt to a military parade. The feds probably thought it was a sneaky hippie manifesto, secretly encouraging people to swap their rifles for daisies. Some readers found the book unbearable because Vonnegut boldly mixed existential dread with dark humor. People were not ready for that brand of comedy, especially when things became a bit too real for readers. So the book's banishment is mostly due to its audacious blend of satire, science fiction, and uncomfortable truths. In the grand theater of literature, it's the play that makes people question what they saw and rethink their beliefs. And during the 70s, it just wasn't what the government wanted people to feel. Invisible Man. Written by Ralph Ellison during the 1950s, the book was so loud that it was like bringing a karaoke machine to a mime party. It loved diving deep into racial identity and societal invisibility while airing dirty secrets and subjects that were once considered taboo. The book's exploration of race and identity stirred the pot during an era when black people were still second-class citizens. No one wanted to read a book with a surprise lecture about politics if they expected a party, and that was what Invisible Man was all about. It's like you realized your favorite TV show is actually a documentary on a boring topic, like industrial waste. Then there's the language and themes that were a bit too much for the 1950s mind. The book tackles violence, exploitation, and discrimination, which used to be as awkward as talking about your non-existent girlfriend in the middle of a family dinner. It was a little too raw and honest, making everyone question everything they knew about society. The vulgar nature of the novel forced schools to expel it from their library quickly, turning Invisible Man into an invisible book. The Satanic Bible. The Satanic Bible is basically kind of a reverse Bible, where instead of following the Ten Commandments, you only have to follow your desires. Written by Anton LaVey back in 1969, it's less about conjuring spirits and more about conjuring controversy. This dark horse of religious literature comes from San Francisco's counterculture scene, which ultimately gave rise to the Church of Satan. It looked less like a holy text and more like the manifesto of a rebellious teenager. Now, you might be thinking that this book is full of instructions on sacrificing goats and summoning demons for your next house party, but instead, LaVey preaches a philosophy of indulgence instead of abstinence. He favors vengeance over turning the other cheek. Unlike the conventional Christian doctrine, it treats the 7 deadly sins like they're items on a self-care checklist. Lust? Go for it. Pride, you're worth it. Greed, treat yourself. It's like a self-help book written by Satan himself. So in essence, it completely flips traditional religious morality on its head, basically telling people to be their own gods, which doesn't sit well with, actual religions that prefer their deities a little less mortal and a lot more divine. LaVey's Bible also includes a lot of rituals and magic, but it's less Harry Potter and more roleplay with candles. There's a whole section in the book dedicated to rituals related to destruction. This was enough to send conservative parents into a panic, imagining their teenagers turning their bedrooms into miniature versions of medieval times, but with more edgy music. The Lesser Key of Solomon. How would you feel if you found out that your school's detention list was actually a catalog of demons you could summon to do your homework? That's exactly the idea behind the Lesser Key of Solomon. It's a supernatural yellow pages for conjuring spirits to assist you in your daily chores. This mystical manual is like the ultimate cheat code for wannabe wizards. It's packed with instructions on how to summon and control 72 demons, each with their own special needs. Need help with your math test? There's a demon for that. Want to become invisible? There's another infernal buddy ready to assist. It's like having an Alexa that's been condemned to hell. The book doesn't just stop at demon summoning though. It's got magical seals, rituals, and enough occult knowledge to make Gandalf look like a birthday party magician. It's basically the Swiss Army knife of grimoires, with a ton of tools for supernatural mischief. But the book is by no means something you can toy with. For starters, messing with demons is generally frowned upon in most religions, and that's for good reason. If you don't have the mental fortitude required to control these entities, you can easily land yourself in a hodgepodge of psychological issues. Some of the rituals described involve some pretty questionable practices as well, like using blood or making sacrifices, the kind of stuff that would make your stomach churn if you're not a seasoned black magic enthusiast. Gospel of Judas. Imagine someone tells you whatever you know about history is wrong. That's basically what the Gospel of Judas does to Christianity. It was discovered in the Egyptian desert, traded on the black market like some kind of historical hot potato, until it was found in May 1983 alongside a ton of other strange manuscripts. The Gospel of Judas flips the script on one of the most famous betrayals in history, turning the ultimate bad guy into, sort of a star. The book claims that Judas wasn't actually a traitor who sold out Jesus for a handful of coins. In fact, he was Jesus's BFF, and the only disciple who really understood the plan. In this version of events, Jesus is like, "Psst, Judas, I need you to do me a solid and turn me in. It's all part of the big cosmic plan." And Judas, being the loyal friend he is, says, "Sure thing, boss," and goes through with it. So Judas helps Jesus in fulfilling his destiny by selling him out. Now, this obviously doesn't sit well with most churches. It sparks controversy by challenging everything people have believed about Jesus, Judas, and the whole crucifixion story for centuries. It's like finding out that Darth Vader was actually the hero of Star Wars all along. Some early heretical Christians actually believed this version of the story to be true, but they also had other strange beliefs, like they thought the world wasn't created by the biblical God, but by another lesser god. The Gospel of Judas even mentions Jesus laughing at the other disciples for praying to the wrong god. The Book of Shadows. You're at a sleepover and your friend pulls out a mysterious, leather-bound book that looks like it fell straight out of a wizard's magic drawer. And it's not their diary filled with crush confessions, it's a Book of Shadows, the DIY spell spellbook that makes Hogwarts dark arts class look like a preschool cooking lesson. The Book of Shadows isn't some mass-produced text that you can snag at Barnes & Noble. It's the ultimate arts and crafts project for witches, like a spiritual scrapbook. Now, traditional witches can have 2 books of shadows, one being a coven book that lays out the core rituals that all new initiates have to follow, while the other is their own draft, filled with spells, rituals, and magical knowledge for personal use. So the Book of Shadows is a living book that is constantly updated. It is the central text in Wicca, a pagan religion focusing on nature worship and witchcraft. Many books of shadows include information on contacting spirits or pagan deities, which obviously does not sit well with traditional religions. These spirits might sometimes demand sacrifices that could put your well-being at risk. There's often talk about skyclad rituals, which basically involve dancing naked around a fire to call to a deity or to put up a curse. All of these things make it really hard for religions such as Christianity and Islam to have a soft spot for the book. Many conservative Christian groups have even labeled the book to be dangerous and sacrilegious, creating a lot of controversy around it. Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is like that cool uncle who tells wild stories at family reunions. Fascinating, but maybe not entirely trustworthy. This ancient text was the life of the party in some Jewish and early Christian circles, but then it got booted from most biblical canons by the 5th century. There could be a lot of reasons for that. The Book of Enoch is filled with angelic drama and cosmic secrets, packing more heavenly gossip than a divine tabloid. It features rogue angels, giant offspring, and enough apocalyptic visions to put all of your doomsday preparations to shame. Then, the book is claimed to be written by Enoch, Noah's great-grandfather, who apparently had VIP access to all of heaven's juiciest secrets, but that can't really be proved. It spills the beans on why Noah's flood happened, blaming it on a bunch of angels who decided dating humans was a good idea. Talk about forbidden love. The Book of Enoch also goes into detail about fallen angels teaching humans forbidden knowledge. We're talking magic, weapon making, and even makeup tips. It's like these angels were running a cosmic YouTube channel of life hacks, but without God's permission. One of the primary reasons it was discarded by the church is because it talks about a messianic figure called the Son of Man, which later Christians believed could be confused for Jesus. This would contradict mainstream religious teachings faster than you can say heresy. Seeing the apparent danger of the text, the church decided to scrap the book altogether. Despite being kicked out of the biblical canon in most places, the Book of Enoch has managed to survive. It's still canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and continues to fascinate scholars, mystics, and anyone who enjoys their religious texts with a side of cosmic intrigue. The Grand Grimoire. Written somewhere in the 16th century, the Grand Grimoire is considered by many to be the premier spellbook for all of your occult needs. This spellbook is so notorious that it makes other occult texts look like my first magic kit in comparison. What makes this book so spicy is that it's got step-by-step instructions on how to make a pact with Lucifer himself. It's like a demonic version of LinkedIn, helping you network with the Prince of Darkness. But there's more. This book also teaches you how to command demons, find hidden treasure, and even become invisible. It's basically a cheat code for life, if your idea of cheating involves giving up your soul. The book takes things up a notch with recipes for several powerful curses. It's like a cookbook for chaos, with a side of eternal damnation. However, dealing with satanic entities and curses can cause more harm than good, so you should probably admire the beauty of such a work from afar, from the safety of your local prayer group. Despite its notorious reputation, the Grand Grimoire has fascinated occultists and curious readers for centuries, being viewed by many as the forbidden fruit of magical texts. However, just like that sketchy email that claims you've won a big lottery, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably involves compromising on eternal salvation. The Book of the Law. While many have heard of books inspired by God, Aleister Crowley's 1904 work was often believed to be inspired by the devil. Crowley claimed that the Book of the Law was dictated to him by an entity called Iwis during a trip to Egypt. It's like he had a supernatural travel guide, but instead of giving directions, he was spouting a whole new religion. The book's main message was, do what thou wilt. It's like telling kids the only rule is there are no rules. A philosophy that makes parents, teachers, and religious leaders throw up in disgust. The book is also packed with cryptic verses, mind-bending philosophy, and mystical mumbo-jumbo that seems like confusing gibberish at the surface. However, the main theme remains constant, with emphasis on ceremonial magic sometimes added to the mix. This supposed spiritual revelation also serves as the central text in Crowley's very own religion, Thelema, for which he proclaimed to be a prophet. His philosophy was a mix of ancient Egyptian religion and Western occultism, seemingly looking like a severe case of identity crisis. Crowley's book challenges pretty much every mainstream religion to the extent of blasphemy. It's got gods and goddesses behaving in an ungodly manner, having enough sexual symbolism to make a sex ed teacher blush. The book also includes some pretty intense stuff about human sacrifice, which Crowley later claimed was metaphorical. His work has influenced everything from modern paganism to rock music, making the Book of the Law a bedrock for counterculture. It has even been banned a few times for corrupting the youth with its hedonistic messages, but whether or not the book was revealed by a demonic entity, it continues to invoke satanic panic to this day. Shams al-Ma'arif. You're exploring a dusty old bookshop in Egypt, when suddenly you stumble upon a leather-bound book that looks like it belongs in Dumbledore's restricted section. Unknown to you, you've just found Ahmad al-Buni's 13th century writing Shams al-Ma'arif al-Kubra, the magic manual that makes Harry Potter's spellbooks look like children's novels. This Islamic grimoire is the holy grail of magic books in the Muslim world. It's like the supernatural equivalent of finding Einstein's lost notebook, but for medieval Islamic scholars seeking divine mysteries. It's packed with hidden knowledge, magical squares, and mystical symbols that would make even the most seasoned fortune teller's head spin. But this book isn't just a harmless collection of party tricks for impressing your friends at the local bazaar. Instead, it's chock full of instructions on how to harness the power of shapeshifters and angels for your personal gain. That's right, if you want to find hidden treasure, there's a spell for that. Or if you feel like making someone fall in love with you, just draw this magical square and boom, your love life now has a supernatural twist. Now, this book is so controversial because its rituals involve using Quranic verses and divine names in ways that make traditional Islamic scholars clutch their prayer beads in anger. Also, practicing any form of magic is forbidden in Islam and is considered a major sin, making the content of the book even more hostile. Over the centuries, the Shams al-Ma'arif has been banned, burned, and blamed for everything from natural disasters to bad hair days. It's the book that sparked more religious debates than a cafeteria argument about pineapple on pizza, basically making it the satanic verses of the medieval Islamic world. Codex Gigas. Your history textbook had a wild night out with a medieval grimoire and decided to have a baby the size of a miniature fridge. That is basically the Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible. Legend has it that the entire book was written in just one night by a monk who made a deal with the devil. It's like pulling an all-nighter for your history exam, but instead of energy drinks, you've got Satan as your study buddy. Whether this really happened or not cannot be confirmed. What's known for certain is that the book was written somewhere in the 13th century. The special thing about the book is that it starts off with a full-size portrait of the devil, grinning like he just won the most charming fallen angel contest, and that made people believe that the pages are cursed. But it's not just a photo album. The Codex Gigas is a weird mishmash of biblical texts, historical chronicles, and magical formulas. It's like someone took a regular Bible, history books, and a wizard's spellbook and tossed them into a medieval blender. Some of the magical texts inside the book are said to be powerful enough to summon demons or cure diseases. It's like having a YouTube tutorial for summoning a bloodthirsty monster right next to a recipe for chicken soup. This mixture of religious texts and occult knowledge eventually led the book to be labeled as blasphemous by many religious authorities. People also claim to have experienced psychological distress while reading the book. Over the centuries, the Codex Gigas has been blamed for everything from wars to bad harvests. It was pretty much treated as a symbol of bad fortune. Titicut Follies 1967. It's 1967, and film director Frederick Wiseman apparently thought that a brutally honest look inside a hospital for the criminally insane would make a great date night movie. This documentary basically pulls back the curtain on the harsh realities of life in the Bridgewater Institution and shows inmates being mistreated, humiliated, and living under inhumane conditions. Scenes include patients being force-fed in a manner less gentle than trying to get a cat to take a pill, and naked men treated with less dignity than furniture being shuffled around. It's not exactly the kind of movie night pick that leaves you feeling uplifted. When it was released, Titicut Follies caused a major stir because it exposed more than just the patient's buttocks. It exposed a system that was profoundly broken. The government slapped the film with a ban faster than you can say a constitutional rights violation, and their official reason was that they were protecting the patient's privacy, because nothing says we care about your privacy like locking you up in inhumane conditions. The ban lasted for 25 years, which is longer than most Hollywood marriages, but when it was finally lifted in 1991, Titicut Follies was hailed as a groundbreaking piece of cinema verite. It sparked discussions about mental health treatment and patients' rights, proving that sometimes the films that make us most uncomfortable are the ones we need to see the most. Fahrenheit 9/11, 2004. Just imagine diving into a pool that's labeled shallow politics, only to find out it's actually deep and filled with sharks, and you've got a meat necklace on. That's kind of what Michael Moore did with Fahrenheit 9/11. He didn't just stir the pot, he pretty much flipped it over and set it on fire. The film kicks off by questioning the legitimacy of President George W. Bush's victory in the 2000 U.S. presidential election, and then from there, highlights the Bush family's business connections with the bin Laden family and other Saudi Arabian elites, which, in Moore's view, influenced U.S. foreign policy. The documentary scrutinizes the U.S. government's response to the 9/11 attacks, portraying it as slow and ineffectual, with a side of where was our leader, as it shows President Bush continuing to read My Pet Goat to school children as the attacks unfolded. The controversy started even before the film hit theaters, because Disney, the parent company of Miramax, the original distributor, decided they didn't want to touch this hot potato with a 10-foot pole. But Moore found other distributors, and the film went on to become the highest-grossing documentary of all time, proving once again that nothing sells tickets like controversy. While not officially banned, Fahrenheit 9/11 faced more hurdles than an Olympic track star. Some theater chains refused to show it, treating the film like it had cinematic cooties. Conservative groups tried to block its advertising, apparently forgetting that in America you can advertise everything from miracle hair growth formulas to bacon-flavored soda. No Fire Zone: The Killing Fields of Sri Lanka, 2013. Released in 2013, this film is the cinematic equivalent of poking a hornet's nest with a stick, if the hornet's nest were an entire government and the stick was a camera. The documentary, directed by Callum McRae, looks hard at the final months of the Sri Lankan Civil War in 2009. It particularly highlights the intense and brutal shelling of civilians, the execution of prisoners, and other war crimes. No Fire Zone is essentially the vacation from hell, only no one on this trip had packed their bags for fun. The documentary uses real footage, including videos taken on the ground during the conflict, to paint a vivid and distressing picture of the human rights violations and suffering endured by the Tamil civilians trapped in the war zone. Of course, the Sri Lankan government called it propaganda and tried to sweep this film under the rug faster than a guilty kid hides broken vase pieces. In some countries, screening this film was riskier than playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. Malaysia banned it outright, probably thinking, if we can't see it, it didn't happen. However, the film still won several awards and was even nominated for an international Emmy. Overall, the film's impact was felt far beyond the camera. The Cove, 2009. We can all agree that nobody ever wants their dirty laundry exposed, especially if said dirty laundry has to do with your country hunting and killing dolphins. The Cove is a film directed by Luis Saihoyos that focuses on the annual dolphin hunt in Taiji, Japan. The movie was structured like a heist film where the good guys, aka activists and filmmakers, planned a daring mission to uncover the bad stuff happening in Taiji's hidden corners. They used underwater microphones and high-definition cameras disguised as rocks. The footage they captured was more shocking than finding out your cat's been leading a double life as a secret agent. We're talking about dolphin slaughtering that would make even the most hardened sushi chef consider a career change to tofu sculpting. It's the kind of film that'll make you think twice about that tuna sandwich you're eating. Well, Japan called it Western propaganda and accused the movie of being culturally insensitive. However, all their attempts to suppress the film were about as effective as trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The film significantly impacted public awareness and policy regarding marine conservation and the global dolphin trade. It won an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature and sparked international campaigns to end dolphin hunting. The Act of Killing, Now, just picture asking a bunch of retired villains from a dark chapter in history to recreate their crimes for the camera, but as if they were filming a movie about their lives. That's the chilling premise of The Act of Killing. This film takes a unique and controversial approach to exploring the mass killings in Indonesia during the mid-1960s, focusing not on the victims, but on the perpetrators. Former Indonesian death squad leaders were asked to reenact their past atrocities in the style of various film genres they admire, such as gangster films and musicals. The killers did so proudly and without remorse, often with a chilling detachment and even a touch of glee. Well, the documentary not only aired Indonesia's dirty laundry, it took it to the dry cleaners, held it up in bright lights, and charged admission for the spectacle. For many Indonesians, this was seen as a deeply unsettling public display of what many considered private national shame. By having the perpetrators reenact their crimes, the film didn't just document the killings, it dove headfirst into the minds of those who carried them out, turning a mirror on society in a way that many found too direct and too raw. Although the Indonesian government did not officially ban it at the national level, the screenings were often held in secret and underground venues to avoid attracting attention from authorities and paramilitary groups. Zeitgeist, 2007. This documentary is sort of like that one friend at a party who's always eager to tell you about conspiracy theories. You know, the one who brings up things like the Illuminati while you're just trying to enjoy your snacks. The movie, directed by Peter Joseph, covers a wide array of topics, all wrapped up in a blanket of skepticism and conspiracy. One of the film's main claims is that major world religions, particularly Christianity, are based on ancient astrological myths. Basically, it's like telling a room full of Christmas enthusiasts that Santa Claus is just an ancient sun god. Well, of course, many found this idea deeply offensive, especially in countries where religion is woven into the fabric of society. Imagine going to your grandma's house for Christmas dinner and announcing, "By the way, Jesus is just a recycled myth." You might be banned from the next family gathering. Well, that's sort of what happened with Zeitgeist. Now, this film was banned in Turkey, the entire Middle East, and China. Given that the film critiques religion heavily and Turkey is a country with a significant Muslim population, it's like the government saw this as someone lighting a match near a powder keg. They were worried it could incite unrest and offend religious sensibilities. The Act of Seeing with One's Own Eyes, 1971. The Act of Seeing with One's Own Eyes is not your typical popcorn flick, and it's definitely not something you'd want to watch during dinner. This 32-minute silent film is as raw and unfiltered as it gets, and is directed by avant-garde filmmaker Stan Brakhage. The title, which translates from Latin as Autopsy, gives you a pretty clear hint about what the movie was all about, which is literally witnessing the stark reality of human mortality up close and personal in a Pittsburgh morgue. To put it bluntly, The Act of Seeing with One's Own Eyes is a documentary about autopsies, but it's not a documentary in the conventional sense. There's no narration, no interviews, no explanatory text, just footage, visceral, raw, unflinching footage of autopsies being performed. The camera doesn't shy away from anything. You see bodies being dissected, organs being removed, and the physical reality of death laid bare in a way that's rarely showed on film. If most films try to comfort or entertain, Brakhage's work does the opposite. It confronts you with the inevitable fact of mortality, forcing you to truly understand what it means to be a living, breathing being destined to one day die. It's kind of like taking off your rose-colored glasses and seeing the world in all its harsh, unforgiving truth. Except in this case, it's a morgue, and the truth involves scalpels and cadavers. Because of its graphic nature, the film was never widely released and is rarely shown in public. Even in the world of art and avant-garde cinema, where pushing boundaries is often the point, this film is in a category of its own. It's the kind of movie you might only watch in a film studies class, and even then it's usually preceded by a serious content warning. The War Game, 1965. This documentary is the type of film that doesn't just make you think, it makes you shiver in your boots, reconsider life choices, and maybe even question whether building a bomb shelter in your backyard is a good idea. Now, this BBC-produced film is a chilling mockumentary-style depiction of what a nuclear war and its aftermath might look like in Britain, and best believe it's not the kind of thing you'd want to watch as a bedtime story. The film, directed by Peter Watkins, presents a terrifyingly realistic scenario of what would happen if Britain were to experience a nuclear attack during the Cold War. Using a mix of documentary techniques and fictional narrative, you would literally see the harrowing events leading up to and following a nuclear strike on the town of Rochester, Kent. But it's not just the explosion that's terrifying, it's what comes after. The film shows the collapse of social order, the overwhelming strain on emergency services, and the grim reality of radiation sickness. It's like someone took all the most horrifying parts parts of a dystopian novel, removed any glimmer of hope, and put it on film. Well, this movie got banned by the British government because it was not exactly the kind of content you want to broadcast if you're trying to maintain public morale. The film was deemed so disturbing and potentially panic-inducing that it was pulled from the TV schedule before it could even air. The official line? The film was simply too horrifying for television, and it's easy to see why. The Soviet Story, 2008. The Soviets and the Nazis have always had a very disturbing, dark image since the beginning of time. Now, just imagine a film that truly dives deep into the core of this image to shine a bright light on their worst crimes. This movie, which Latvian filmmaker Edvins Snar directed, is a powerful indictment of Soviet atrocities, focusing on the atrocities committed by the Soviet regime, particularly under Joseph Stalin. It sheds light on events such as the Holodomor, which was the man-made famine in Ukraine, the mass executions during the Great Purge, the forced deportations, the gulags, and the Katyn massacre, where the Soviet secret police murdered thousands of Polish officers. One of the more controversial aspects of the documentary is its claim that the Soviets and Nazis had a shared ideological foundation rooted in the desire to control and eliminate certain populations. Well, as expected, the film was heavily criticized in Russia and labeled as anti-Russian propaganda. Many Russians and some historians accused the film of being biased, oversimplified, and inflammatory, arguing that it distorted history and unfairly equated the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany. It was never shown on state-controlled media and was harshly condemned by government officials and media outlets. In some cases, there were efforts to prevent the film from being shown at screenings in Russia and in Russian-speaking regions of other countries. Under the Sun, 2015. Russian director Vitaly Mansky thought he'd hit the jackpot when North Korea invited him to make a film about a typical family in Pyongyang. Little did the North Korean government know, they'd just invited a fox into their carefully constructed henhouse of propaganda. The plan was simple. North Korea would script every scene, direct every shot, and create a picture-perfect image of life in the workers' paradise. The film shows the typical family's daughter, Jinmi, being coached on how to smile, what to say, and even how to eat her kimchi more joyfully. It was like The Truman Show, but with more kimchi and fewer boats crashing into walls. But Mansky, the clever cookie he is, had an ace up his sleeve. Or rather, a camera up his tripod. He kept the cameras rolling between takes, capturing the behind-the-scenes of this carefully choreographed charade. It's like catching your cat plotting world domination when they think you're not looking. This showed the reality of the people living in North Korea and how the government managed every single thing. When North Korea realized what Mansky had done, they demanded that the footage be destroyed, but Mansky had already smuggled it out of the country. The documentary premiered at the 2015 Jalava International Documentary Film Festival in the Czech Republic, far from the reach of North Korean censors. If you want to know more about how bad the cybersecurity issues are currently, then you should join our Discord server. Vaxxed. From Cover-Up to Catastrophe, 2006. Vaxxed From Cover-Up to Catastrophe is like that one dinner guest who shows up uninvited, eats all the appetizers, and then drops a conspiracy theory bomb right in the middle of your cozy meal. The film, directed by Andrew Wakefield, is buried balls deep in controversy because it promotes the widely debunked claim that vaccines, particularly the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, are linked to autism. The film presents the massive narrative that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, covered up data that supposedly showed a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. Wakefield claims that vaccines are causing a health catastrophe and that the government is hiding this from the public. Well, when the movie came out, it wasn't exactly given a warm welcome by the scientific community or health organizations, because the film is chock full of misinformation, and all the claims have been thoroughly debunked by scientists, doctors, and just about every reputable health organization out there. The worst is that the guy who's even spreading this cock and bull story about vaccines had already lost his medical license because of a paper he wrote in 1998. It was revealed that his research was full of ethical flaws and misinformation. Anyways, Vaxxed was banned and removed from various streaming services and theaters that didn't want to contribute to the spread of dangerous misinformation. 0 Days, 2016. Now, it's definitely not news how disruptive a computer virus can be once it gets into your system. It could destroy your entire life if you do not take the necessary steps to fix it. Now, imagine a film that exposes a software virus that would not only destroy and steal your data, data, but also physically destroy its target. This film, directed by Alex Gibney, focuses on Stuxnet, a malicious computer worm that's more complex than a Rubik's Cube. This little piece of malware was apparently created by the US and Israel to sabotage Iran's nuclear program. Talk about taking slide into their DMs to a whole new level. The documentary does a great job of breaking down how Stuxnet works, even for those of us who can't tell a computer virus from a sinus virus. It explains that Stuxnet was not just any malware, it was designed to subtly manipulate industrial control systems that manage everything from water treatment facilities to power plants. Gibney interviewed NSA whistleblowers and cybersecurity experts, and even created a CGI composite character to represent multiple anonymous sources. The film exposes the potential consequences of cyber weapons, because once a cyber weapon like Stuxnet is out there, it can be reverse engineered, replicated, and turned back on its creators. It paints a picture of a future where wars are fought with keyboards instead of guns, and the biggest threat to national security might be a pimply teenager in his parents' basement.